The blizzard came so suddenly that Clara Brennan didn't even have time to pray before her horse went down, throwing her hard into the white fury that swallowed the world whole. She hit the frozen ground with force enough to knock the breath from her lungs, and when she tried to stand, her left ankle screamed in protest. The wind tore at her cape, ripping it from her shoulders and sending it tumbling into the void of snow and ice. She watched it disappear, knowing that without it, she had maybe an hour before the cold claimed her life. Clara had been traveling from Silver City to Warren, Idaho, carrying documents for her father's mining company in December of 1882. The route should have been manageable, but the storm had rolled down from the mountains with such speed that even old-timers would have been caught off guard. Now she was alone. Her horse had bolted or died somewhere in the white darkness, and she could barely see 3 feet in front of her face. The temperature had dropped so fast that her fingers were already going numb inside her gloves. She stumbled forward, her injured ankle making each step agony, but she knew that to stop moving was to die. The snow was already halfway up her boots, and it kept falling in thick, relentless sheets. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. Her teeth chattered so violently that she bit her tongue, tasting copper. Then, through the howling wind, she saw something. A dark shape, solid and unmoving. She lurched toward it, praying it wasn't a hallucination. As she got closer, she realized it was a fence post. She grabbed onto it with both hands, using it to steady herself, and followed the line of fencing with desperate hope building in her chest. Fences meant property. Property meant shelter. The fencing led her to a barn, massive and sturdy, and she nearly sobbed with relief. She pushed through the snow to the door and threw herself against it. It was latched from the inside, but there was enough give that she could force her arm through and work the latch free. The moment she got it open, she fell inside, landing on hay-covered floor. The wind slammed the door shut behind her. Inside the barn, the world was quieter. The storm still raged outside, but the walls muffled the worst of it. Clara lay there for a moment, just breathing, feeling the burning cold in her lungs. Several horses shifted in their stalls, disturbed by her entrance. She could smell hay and livestock and leather. It was the most beautiful smell she had ever known. She forced herself to her feet, wincing at the pain in her ankle. She needed to get warm, needed to assess her situation. She found horse blankets stacked near one of the stalls and wrapped 2 of them around herself. Then she burrowed into a pile of hay in the corner, covering herself completely. The barn was cold, but it was nothing compared to the deadly chill outside. Clara had no idea who owned this property, but she would thank them with every penny she had if they let her live through the night. She must have dozed because when she heard the barn door open, she startled awake, her heart pounding. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the sound of stomping boots. A man's voice, deep and rough, spoke to the horses. "Easy now. I know it is cold. I will get you more feed." Clara remained perfectly still in her hay pile, watching through a small gap in the blanket. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat covered in snow. He moved through the barn with easy familiarity, checking each horse, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. When he turned toward the corner where she was hiding, she saw his face in the lamplight he carried. He was somewhere in his late 20s, with dark hair and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes were a striking light color, gray or blue, she couldn't tell in the dim light. He was heading straight toward her hiding spot. Clara held her breath. Then he stopped, his entire body going still. He had seen something. Probably her boot, which was sticking out from under the blanket. His hand moved to his hip, where she could now see he wore a pistol. "Come out," he said, his voice hard. "Slow." Clara pushed the blanket back and struggled to sit up, her muscles stiff from cold. The man's eyes widened slightly when he saw she was a woman, but he didn't lower his guard. "Please," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "I was caught in the storm. My horse threw me. I would have died out there." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set the lamp down on a barrel and approached her, kneeling down to her level. Up close, she could see his eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds. "You are injured," he said, noticing how she favored her left leg. "My ankle. I think it might be broken." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. When she didn't, he gently felt along her ankle through her boot. His hands were large and calloused, but surprisingly gentle. Clara winced when he touched a particular spot. "Sprained, I think, not broken. You are lucky." He sat back on his heels. "How long have you been in my barn?" "I don't know. A few hours, maybe. I'm sorry for trespassing." "I had nowhere else to go." He stood up, and for a moment she thought he might ask her to leave. Instead, he held out his hand. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "My house is 50 yards from here. I will help you. You cannot stay in the barn tonight. The storm is getting worse." Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed, and he immediately steadied her, his arm going around her waist. She leaned into his solid warmth, too cold and hurt and grateful to care about propriety. "What is your name?" he asked as he wrapped one of the horse blankets around her shoulders. "Clara Brennan." "And yours?" "Zachary Parker. Most people call me Zach." He helped her to the barn door, then picked her up without warning, cradling her against his chest. Clara gasped in surprise. "The snow is too deep," he explained. "You will not make it on that ankle." He pushed through the door into the screaming white world. Clara buried her face against his coat, trying to shield herself from the stinging snow. True to his word, it was not a long journey, but by the time they reached his house, both of them were covered in fresh snow. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, shutting out the storm. The warmth hit Clara like a physical thing. She could feel it seeping into her frozen skin, almost painful in its intensity. Zach carried her to a chair near the fireplace and set her down gently. The fire was burning strong, filling the room with blessed heat. "Stay there," he said, already moving toward another room. "I will get dry clothes." Clara looked around the house while he was gone. It was a single large room with a sleeping area in one corner, a kitchen area in another, and the sitting area where she now sat near the fireplace. Everything was neat and well maintained. There were no feminine touches anywhere, no curtains or decorative items. This was clearly a bachelor's home. Zach returned with an armful of clothes. "These will be too big, but they are dry. There is a screen in the corner. Can you manage?" "I think so." He handed her the clothes, then turned his back, busying himself at the stove. Clara limped behind the screen and began the painful process of peeling off her frozen clothing. Her fingers were still clumsy with cold, and her ankle throbbed with every movement. The dress she had been wearing was stiff with ice in places. She finally got it off along with her soaked undergarments and pulled on the clothes Zach had given her. A wool shirt that hung to her knees and pants that she had to roll up several times. There was a rope she used as a belt. When she emerged from behind the screen, Zach glanced at her and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Better than freezing," he said. "Much better. Thank you." He gestured to the table. "Sit. I will make coffee and food. When did you last eat?" Clara tried to remember. "This morning, before I left Silver City." He nodded and went to work. Clara watched him move around the kitchen with efficient movements. He had removed his heavy coat, and she could see he was powerfully built, his shoulders straining the fabric of his shirt. He had the look of a man who worked hard physical labor every day. Within 20 minutes, he had hot coffee and a plate of beans and bread in front of her. Clara ate ravenously, not caring that she probably looked uncivilized. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. "What were you doing out there?" Zach asked, sitting across from her with his own coffee. "Silver City is a hard ride from here, even in good weather." "I was taking documents to Warren for my father. He owns shares in several mining operations. I have made the trip before, but never in winter." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "The storm came so fast. They do that in December. These mountains are unpredictable. Do you live here alone?" "Yes. I run cattle, though this time of year there is not much to do except keep them fed and alive." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "You cannot travel until the storm passes. It could be days." Clara felt her face heat. "I understand. I do not mean to impose. I can sleep in the barn once I am warm." "No," he said firmly. "You will stay in the house. I will take the barn. I cannot ask you to do that. This is your home." "You are not asking. I am telling you." His tone left no room for argument. A woman alone with a man she does not know, people talk. "But if I sleep in the barn, your reputation is protected." Clara felt a rush of gratitude. Many men would not have cared about her reputation, especially out here where few would know or care. "Thank you. That is very kind," he shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "It is the right thing." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm howl outside. Clara studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something solid about Zachary Parker, something dependable. His face was weathered from sun and wind with fine lines around his eyes. He had a scar on his jaw, pale against his tanned skin. His hands were scarred too, the hands of a working man. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "5 years. I bought the land and built the house and barn myself. It is a good house. It serves." He stood up and collected their empty plates. "You should rest. You have been through a lot today." Clara realized she was exhausted. Every part of her body ached. "Where should I sleep?" "The bed. I will get blankets for the barn." "Please let me take the barn. You have already done so much." He gave her a look that was almost stern. "Miss Brennan, I am twice your size and used to sleeping rough. You are injured and half frozen. You will take the bed." Clara knew better than to argue further. "Thank you, Mr. Parker." "Zach," he corrected. "If you are going to be in my house, we can use first names. Then you should call me Clara." He nodded, then gathered up an armload of blankets and headed for the door. "Keep the fire going. There is wood stacked next to it. I will check on you in the morning." Then he was gone, back out into the storm. Clara limped to the bed and sank down onto it gratefully. It was a simple bed, but the mattress was stuffed with something soft, and there were thick quilts piled on top. She crawled under the covers fully dressed and pulled them up to her chin. As she lay there, warm and safe, she thought about the man who had saved her life. Zachary Parker. He was gruff and quiet, but there was a gentleness to him too. The way he had touched her ankle, checking for breaks. The way he had carried her through the storm. The way he insisted on protecting her reputation, even at his own discomfort. She wondered what had brought him out here to live alone. He didn't seem like a man who disliked people, but he had built his life in solitude. There was a story there, she was certain. Clara drifted off to sleep with the sound of the storm outside and the crackle of the fire inside, feeling safer than she had any right to feel in a stranger's home. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window. The storm had passed. Clara sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered where she was. She could hear sounds from outside, the lowing of cattle and the whinny of horses. She got out of bed and tested her ankle. It was still sore and swollen, but better than yesterday. She could put weight on it if she was careful. She limped to the window and looked out. The world was transformed. Snow covered everything in a thick white blanket sparkling in the morning sun. It was beautiful and deadly. She could see why the storm had nearly killed her. It must have dropped 2 feet of snow at least. The door opened and Zach came in, stamping snow from his boots. He saw her at the window and nodded. "You are awake. How is the ankle?" "Better. Still painful, but I can walk on it." "Good." He moved to the stove and began making coffee. "The storm has passed, but the snow is deep. It will take days to melt enough for travel." Clara felt a flutter of anxiety. "My father will be worried. He was expecting me in Warren 2 days ago. There is nothing to be done about it. No one can travel in this." He was right, of course. She would just have to hope her father assumed she had been delayed by the storm and hadn't done something foolish. Though she supposed getting thrown from her horse and nearly freezing to death qualified as foolish. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. "I feel useless sitting here while you work." Zach glanced at her. "Can you cook?" "Yes. My mother taught me. Then you can make breakfast. I need to check the cattle, make sure none of them died in the storm." He grabbed his heavy coat. "There is bacon and eggs in the cold box outside the back door. Coffee should be ready soon." He left before she could respond. Clara tied back her hair with a piece of string she found and got to work. It felt good to be useful, to repay his kindness in some small way. She made bacon and eggs and found some potatoes that she fried up as well. By the time Zach returned, the food was ready. He looked surprised when he saw the spread on the table. "You did not need to do all this. You saved my life. It is the least I can do." They sat down to eat, and Clara noticed that Zach ate with better manners than she would have expected from a bachelor rancher. He wasn't crude or rough. He used his napkin and didn't talk with his mouth full. Someone had taught him how to behave at a table. "This is good," he said after a few bites. "Better than what I usually make." "What do you usually make?" "Beans. Bread if I have time. Sometimes I shoot a rabbit or deer." "That sounds lonely." He looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "I prefer being alone." "Why?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I was a soldier. In the Indian Wars, I saw things, did things that I am not proud of. When I got out, I wanted to be somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could not hurt anyone." Clara felt her throat tighten. She knew about the Indian Wars, knew they had been brutal and often unjust. The government had broken treaty after treaty, pushing the tribes from their lands. Men like Zach had been sent to enforce those policies, whether they agreed with them or not. "That must have been hard," she said softly. "It was war. War is always hard." He stood up abruptly, as if he regretted saying anything. "I need to clear paths to the barn and outbuildings." "You should stay inside. Keep your weight off that ankle." He left again, and Clara was alone with her thoughts. She cleaned up from breakfast, then explored the house more thoroughly. She found books on a shelf which surprised her. Most of them were about ranching and animal husbandry, but there were a few novels too. One was a worn copy of Moby Dick. She pulled it down and settled into the chair by the fire to read. The days fell into a pattern. Zach would work outside, caring for the animals and clearing snow. Clara would cook and clean, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk. Slowly, Zach began to open up. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 16, about joining the army because he had nowhere else to go and no other skills, about the campaigns against the Cheyenne and Arapaho, about the things he had seen that still haunted him. "We were told we were protecting settlers," he said one night, staring into the fire. "But we were taking their land, their way of life. I followed orders because that is what soldiers do. But I knew it was wrong." Clara didn't know what to say. She reached out and touched his hand, and he looked at her in surprise. "You cannot change the past," she said, "but you can choose how you live now." He turned his hand over and squeezed her fingers gently, then let go. "That is what I am trying to do." Clara told him about her life too, about growing up in San Francisco, about her mother dying when she was 12, about her father throwing himself into his business to cope with the grief, about how she had become his assistant, helping him manage his mining investments because she was good with numbers and paperwork. "You enjoy it?" Zach asked. "Sometimes. It is interesting work, but I think my father would have preferred if I had married and given him grandchildren instead." She laughed, but there was a bitter edge to it. "I am 23. Most women my age are married with children already." "Why are you not?" Clara considered the question. "I never met anyone who made me want to give up my freedom." "Marriage means giving a man control over your life, your property, everything. I have seen too many women trapped in unhappy marriages to rush into one." "A smart man would want a partner, not a servant," Zach said. Clara looked at him, surprised. "Most men do not think that way." "Most men are fools." She laughed, a real laugh this time, and saw a small smile tug at the corner of Zach's mouth. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less burdened. By the third day, Clara's ankle was much improved. She could walk with only a slight limp. She began to dread the moment when the snow would melt enough for her to leave. She told herself it was because she was comfortable here, that Zach's house felt more like a home than anywhere she had lived in years. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was drawn to Zachary Parker in a way she had never been drawn to anyone before. It wasn't just that he was handsome, though he was. It was his quiet strength, his gentleness with the animals, the way he listened when she talked as if her words actually mattered. It was the flash of humor she occasionally glimpsed, the intelligence in his eyes, the sadness he carried that she wanted to help heal. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. His expression would be unguarded in those moments, almost hungry. Then he would notice her noticing and look away, his face closing off again. On the fourth night, they were sitting by the fire as usual when Zach suddenly said, "You should stay." Clara's heart jumped. "What? Stay here, on the ranch? You could help with the books, the accounts." "I am not good with paperwork, and you could cook. I would pay you wages." It was a practical offer, a business arrangement, so why did Clara feel disappointed? "I have to go back to my father. He needs me." "Does he? Or does he need someone to do his work while he does other things?" The question stung because it was true. Her father relied on her, but he didn't truly need her. He could hire a secretary, a bookkeeper. He kept her close because it was convenient, not because he couldn't function without her. "I cannot just abandon him," she said. "I am not asking you to abandon him. Send him a letter. Tell him you are staying in Idaho to help a rancher with his business. Come back in the spring if you want, but stay through the winter." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Please," Clara's breath caught. There was something in his voice, in his face, that went beyond a simple business proposition. "Why do you want me to stay?" He looked away, jaw clenching. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said very quietly, "Because I have not been this happy in 5 years. Because when you are here, the house does not feel empty. Because I am tired of being alone." Her heart was pounding now. "Zach." He stood up abruptly. "Forget I said anything. It was inappropriate. You should go to Warren as soon as the roads are clear. I will take you myself." He headed for the door, clearly intending to spend the night in the barn again. Clara stood up, ignoring the twinge in her ankle, and caught his arm. "Wait." He stopped but didn't turn around. She could feel the tension in his body, the rigid control he was exerting over himself. "What if I want to stay?" she said softly. Now he turned, his eyes searching her face. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am happy here too, happier than I have been in a long time. I am saying that I want to stay, but not as an employee." She took a deep breath, her heart hammering. "I want to stay because I care about you, because somewhere over these past 4 days I started to fall in love with you." Zach stared at her, his expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Clara, You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are kind and honorable. I know you protected me when you could have taken advantage. I know you carry guilt for things you were ordered to do, which means you have a conscience. I know that when you smile, which is not nearly often enough, my whole body lights up. What else do I need to know?" He reached out and cupped her face in his rough hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "You deserve better than a broken soldier living in the middle of nowhere. You are not broken, and I do not want better. I want you." He made a sound that was half laugh, half groan, and then he kissed her. It was careful at first, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Clara leaned into him, her hands gripping his shirt, and the kiss deepened. It was like nothing she had ever experienced, a rushing feeling that made her dizzy and warm and alive. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I do not deserve you," he whispered. "That is not for you to decide." He laughed softly, and she felt the sound vibrate through his chest. Then he kissed her again, and Clara thought that maybe she had not been left on his land by a blizzard at all. Maybe it had been fate, pushing her toward the one place she was meant to be. They sat down on the floor in front of the fire, Clara tucked against Zach's side with his arm around her. They talked late into the night, making plans. Clara would send a letter to her father explaining that she was staying to help a rancher through the winter. It was true enough, even if it wasn't the whole truth. In the spring, if her father insisted, she would visit. But she would come back. This was her home now. "We should get married," Zach said suddenly. Clara pulled back to look at him. "Are you proposing?" He looked uncertain. "I am doing it badly, I think. I have never proposed before." She couldn't help but smile. "That is reassuring. Clara Brennan, will you marry me? I do not have much to offer, just this ranch and myself, but I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, and Clara thought that she had never made a better decision in her life. 4 days ago she had been dying in a blizzard. Now she was engaged to a man she loved, starting a new life in the Idaho wilderness. It was mad and impulsive and perfect. The next morning, Clara woke in the bed while Zach slept in the barn, propriety maintained until they could be properly married. But everything felt different now, charged with possibility. She made breakfast singing to herself, something she never did. When Zach came in from the barn, he looked at her and smiled, a real full smile that made her heart flip. "You are happy." "I am. Are you?" "More than I thought possible." They spent the day together, Zach teaching Clara about the ranch operations. He had 50 head of cattle, mostly Herefords, that he was building into a breeding herd. He also kept chickens for eggs and a few pigs. The work was hard but satisfying. Clara found she enjoyed it, enjoyed being outside in the cold, crisp air, enjoyed working beside Zach. That evening, as they sat by the fire again, Clara asked, "When can we marry? Is there a preacher in Ruby City?" "There is, but I do not know if he can get here while the snow is this deep. Ruby City is 15 miles from here. Then we will wait until we can get to town. I want a proper wedding, even if it is a small one." Zach squeezed her hand. "Whatever you want." The next week passed in a blur of happiness. The snow began to melt, slowly at first, then faster as the temperature rose. Clara wrote a letter to her father and Zach rode into Ruby City to post it. He came back with news. "The preacher says he can marry us on Saturday if we can get to town. There is also a seamstress who can make you a proper dress if you want one." Clara thought about it. A fancy wedding dress seemed frivolous when she was wearing borrowed men's clothes and living on a ranch, but part of her wanted it anyway, wanted to look beautiful for Zach on their wedding day. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." On Friday they rode into Ruby City together. Clara riding one of Zach's horses since hers had never been found. Ruby City was small, just a collection of buildings clustered around the mining operations, but it was bustling with activity. News of the engagement had apparently spread, because several women approached Clara at the general store, eager to meet the mysterious woman who had captured Zachary Parker's heart. "We thought he would be a bachelor forever," one of them said, a kind-faced woman named Margaret who ran the boarding house. "He always kept to himself." "He is a private man," Clara said diplomatically. "But a good one," Margaret said firmly. "He helped my son when our wagon broke down in a snowstorm 2 years back. Sheltered us for 3 days until it was safe to travel. Never asked for a penny." Clara felt a rush of warmth. She was learning more about the man she was marrying, and everything she learned made her love him more. The seamstress, a French woman named Alois, took Clara's measurements and promised to have a dress ready by the next morning. "It will not be fancy," she warned. "I do not have silk or lace, but it will be pretty." "That is all I need," Clara assured her. That night, Clara stayed at the boarding house while Zach slept in the bunkhouse at the livery stable. It felt strange to be apart from him after the days they had spent together on the ranch. She lay awake for a long time, thinking about the next day, about the life she was choosing. Was she being foolish? She had known Zach for barely 2 weeks, but Clara had always trusted her instincts, and her instincts told her that Zachary Parker was a man she could build a life with. A man who would be a true partner, not a master. A man who had seen the worst of humanity and still chose kindness. She thought about her father, wondered what he would say when he got her letter. He would probably be angry at first, then worried. But eventually, she hoped, he would understand. She was old enough to make her own choices, to forge her own path. This was her choice, and she was at peace with it. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Clara dressed carefully in the gown Alois had made. It was simple, pale blue wool with pearl buttons down the front, but it fit perfectly and made her feel beautiful. Margaret helped her arrange her hair, pinning it up with small white flowers she had saved from summer. "You look lovely," Margaret said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Clara looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, glowing. She looked like a bride. The wedding was held in the small church at the edge of town. A surprising number of people attended, ranchers and miners and townspeople who wanted to witness the ceremony. Zach stood at the front in a new shirt and jacket, his hair neatly combed, looking nervous and handsome. When Clara walked down the aisle toward him, his face transformed. The nervousness vanished, replaced by something close to awe. She took his hands and they turned to face the preacher together. The ceremony was brief and simple. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her gently, sweetly, and the small congregation erupted in applause. Afterwards, there was a modest celebration at the boarding house. Margaret had prepared food and someone produced a fiddle and played cheerful music. Clara danced with Zach, laughing as he admitted he was terrible at dancing but trying anyway. They danced with other townspeople too, accepting congratulations and well wishes. "You are good for him," an old rancher named Tom told Clara. "I have known Zach for 4 years. This is the first time I have seen him truly smile." "He is good for me too," Clara said, watching her husband across the room as he talked with some of the other men. As if sensing her gaze, Zach looked up and their eyes met. The heat in his expression made her blush. He excused himself and crossed to her, taking her hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Parker?" he asked. Mrs. Parker. Clara liked the sound of that. "Yes, I am ready." They said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch together as the sun set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. When they reached the house, Zach dismounted and lifted Clara down from her horse, but he didn't set her on the ground. Instead, he carried her to the door. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "Carrying my bride over the threshold. It is tradition. You know about traditions. My mother told me once. When I was young, I always remembered." He carried her inside and set her gently on her feet. Then he kissed her, no longer gentle or tentative but with passion and need that made Clara's knees weak. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair. They stumbled toward the bed, shedding clothing as they went. Clara had been nervous about this part, the intimacy of marriage, but with Zach it felt natural and right. He was careful with her, attentive to her responses, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. Afterwards, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Clara's head resting on Zach's chest as he ran his fingers through her hair. "I love you," he said softly. "I know I do not say it enough, but I do, more than I thought I could love anyone." Clara tilted her head to look at him. "I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I did not know I could feel this way, because I cannot imagine my life without you now, because in 2 weeks you have become everything to me." He tightened his arms around her. "You are everything to me too. You are the reason I believe I can be better than I was. The reason I want to be better." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Clara thought that even if the blizzard had nearly killed her, it had also given her the greatest gift of her life. The winter passed in a blur of work and laughter and love. Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless tasks that needed doing. She learned to milk cows and collect eggs and mend fences. Her hands, which had once been soft from office work, grew calloused. Her body grew stronger. Zach taught her to ride better, to shoot a rifle in case she ever needed to protect herself. He taught her to read the weather, to know when a storm was coming by the smell of the air and the behavior of the animals. She taught him to enjoy reading again, to see books as an escape rather than a reminder of a life he had left behind. They read to each other in the evenings, acting out different voices, making each other laugh. In February, a letter arrived from Clara's father. It was terse and angry, demanding she return to San Francisco immediately. Clara read it, felt a pang of guilt, and then wrote back explaining that she was married now, that her place was with her husband. She invited her father to visit when the weather improved, but she made it clear she was not coming back. "Do you think he will come?" Zach asked, reading over her shoulder. "I do not know. I hope so. I want him to meet you to see that I am happy." "And if he does not approve?" Clara turned and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Then that is his loss. You are my family now." Spring arrived gradually, the snow melting to reveal the land beneath. The ranch came alive with new growth. Several of the cows gave birth to calves, and Clara fell in love with the awkward, adorable creatures. She named each one, despite Zach's gentle teasing that she should not name animals they might eventually sell. "I cannot help it," she said, watching a calf nurse from its mother. "They all have personalities. You have a soft heart." "Is that a bad thing?" He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "No, it is one of the many things I love about you." They expanded the ranch that spring, buying another 20 head of cattle from a rancher who was moving to Oregon. Zach also built a chicken coop big enough to house 50 chickens, saying that Clara's egg business was growing. She had started selling eggs in Ruby City, using the money to buy supplies for the house. It gave her a sense of pride and independence, even though Zach repeatedly told her she did not need to contribute financially. "I want to," she insisted. "This is my ranch too. I want to help build it." In May, Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, the signs unmistakable to someone who had helped nurse her father's housekeeper through a pregnancy years ago. She was nervous to tell Zach, worried about how he would react. She waited until evening, until they were sitting by the fire in their usual spot. "I have something to tell you," she said. He looked up from the book he was reading. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and genuine that it took her breath away. He set the book aside and pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" "Happy." "Clara, I am terrified and thrilled and grateful. I never thought I would have this. A family. A home. I thought I would spend my life alone, and I had made peace with that. But then you came and everything changed." She kissed him, tasting salt, and realized he was crying. She had never seen him cry before. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, both of you." He placed his hand on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. Clara covered his hand with hers, and they sat like that for a long time, contemplating the miracle of the life they had created together. The summer was busy. Zach hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, 2 brothers named Jack and Henry who had just arrived from Texas. They were hard workers and respectful, treating Clara with the deference due to the ranch owner's wife. Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She continued to work as much as she could, though Zach became increasingly protective as her belly grew. By August, he was practically ordering her to rest, to let the men handle the heavy work. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she protested. "I know, but humor me, I worry." How could she argue with that? So she focused on tasks that did not require heavy lifting. She kept the books, planned the meals, tended the vegetable garden she had planted behind the house. She sewed baby clothes, tiny gowns and blankets, preparing for the arrival of their child. In September, Clara's father arrived. She was hanging laundry when she saw the buggy approaching, and her heart leaped with joy and nervousness. Zach came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Is that him?" he asked. "Yes, be nice." "I am always nice." Clara elbowed him gently, then hurried forward to greet her father. He climbed down from the buggy, looking older than she remembered, his hair grayer, his face more lined. But when he saw her, his expression softened. "Clara," he said, opening his arms. She went to him, hugging him tight. "Father, I am so glad you came." He pulled back and looked at her, taking in her swollen belly, her sun-browned skin, her simple dress. "You look different." "I am different. I am happy." Her father turned to Zach, who had come to stand beside Clara. The 2 men sized each other up, and Clara held her breath. "You are Zachary Parker," her father said. "I am, and you are Richard Brennan. Your daughter has told me a lot about you." "Has she?" Richard looked between them, then sighed. "I came here to take my daughter home, to talk sense into her, but I can see that would be pointless." Clara felt a stab of disappointment. "Father," he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I came here with anger in my heart, feeling betrayed and abandoned. But I see now that I was the one who abandoned you first. I let my grief over your mother consume me. I let you become my assistant instead of my daughter. I forgot that you needed to live your own life." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes. "Father, you look happy, Clara, truly happy. And you," he turned to Zach, "you look at my daughter the way I used to look at her mother, like she hung the moon. So I am not going to take her from you. But I am going to warn you that if you ever hurt her, if you ever give her reason to regret marrying you, I will make you regret it." Zach met Richard's gaze steadily. "I would expect nothing less, sir. And I promise you, I will spend my life making sure she never regrets choosing me." Richard studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Good. Now, Are you going to invite me inside, or do I have to stand out here all day? The tension broke, and everyone laughed. They went inside, and Clara made coffee and served the apple pie she had baked that morning. Richard looked around the house, taking in the neat rooms, the comfortable furnishings, the obvious care that had gone into making it a home. "You built all this yourself?" he asked Zach. "I did. With some help from neighbors for the barn raising. It is good work, solid." Richard took a sip of his coffee. "Clara tells me you run cattle." "Yes, sir. I have 70 head now, hoping to expand to 100 by next year." They talked business for a while, and Clara could see her father relaxing, seeing that Zach was intelligent and capable, that he was building something real. Eventually, Richard turned to Clara. "When is the baby due?" "November. The doctor in Ruby City thinks early November." "And you have a doctor? Someone who can help when the time comes?" "Yes, Dr. Matthews, and Margaret from the boarding house has helped deliver dozens of babies. She will be here too." Richard nodded, satisfied. He stayed for 3 days, and by the time he left, he and Zach had developed a mutual respect. On the morning of his departure, Richard pulled Clara aside. "I was wrong to be angry," he said. "You have made a good life here, better than the one I was offering you in San Francisco. I miss you, Father, but I belong here with Zach. I know, and I am proud of you. Your mother would be proud too." He hugged her tight. "I will come back after the baby is born. I want to meet my grandchild. We would like that." After he left, Clara felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. She had her father's blessing. Her old life and new life had been reconciled. November came cold and crisp. Clara grew increasingly uncomfortable as the baby grew, but she was too excited to be truly miserable. Zach was constantly attentive, bringing her tea, massaging her swollen feet, reading to her when she could not sleep. On a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks into November, Clara felt the first contraction. She was kneading bread when the pain hit, sharp and unmistakable. She gripped the edge of the table and breathed through it. "Zach," she called, "it is time." He came running from outside, his face pale. "Now, right now." "Yes, now. Send Henry to fetch Margaret and the doctor." The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Margaret arrived first, calm and capable, directing Zach to boil water and gather clean towels. The doctor arrived an hour later, checked Clara's progress, and pronounced everything normal. "First babies take time," he said. "Just breathe and push when I tell you." It was late afternoon when Clara finally delivered, her body racked with exhaustion and pain. But then she heard a sharp, angry wail. Her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," Margaret announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. "A healthy, strong boy." She placed the baby in Clara's arms, and Clara looked down at her son through tears of joy and exhaustion. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a downy covering of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Zach knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is so small." "He is beautiful," Clara said. "We made this, you and I." "What should we name him?" Zach asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. The baby gripped his finger, and Zach made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Clara had been thinking about names for months. "What about Zachary Parker Jr.? "No," Zach said immediately. "He deserves his own name, not to carry mine." "What about Samuel? After my father," Clara considered it. "Samuel Parker, I like it. Samuel Richard Parker, after both his grandfathers. Perfect." They spent the rest of the evening marveling over their son, counting his fingers and toes, watching him sleep. Margaret stayed the night to help, showing Clara how to nurse the baby, how to change his diaper with the cloth they had prepared. Over the next weeks, Clara fell completely in love with motherhood. It was exhausting and overwhelming, but she had never felt more fulfilled. Zach was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried at night, singing to him in his deep, off-key voice, changing diapers without complaint. "You are a natural," Clara told him one night as he rocked Samuel to sleep. "I am terrified I will do something wrong. We both are. But we will figure it out together." Richard arrived in December, bringing gifts for the baby and apologies that business had kept him from coming sooner. He was enchanted with his grandson, holding him awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. "He looks like you," he told Zach. "He has Clara's smile," Zach countered. "He has both of you," Richard said. "He is lucky." Richard stayed through Christmas, and it was the best Christmas Clara could remember. They decorated a small pine tree that Zach cut from the hills behind the ranch. They roasted a goose and made pies. Jack and Henry joined them for dinner, along with Margaret, who had become a good friend. It was loud and chaotic and full of laughter. On Christmas night, after everyone had left and Samuel was asleep in his cradle, Clara and Zach sat by the fire together, her head on his shoulder. "A year ago I was alone in this house," Zach said quietly. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life that way, and then a blizzard brought you to me." "You saved my life," Clara said. "You saved mine. I was just existing before you came. Now I am living." Clara turned and kissed him, pouring all her love into it. When they pulled apart, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I am grateful every day that the storm brought you here, that you chose to stay." "The blizzard left me on your land," Clara said, "but love made me stay. Love keeps me here. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, growing to 150 head of cattle. They built a larger house, with separate bedrooms for the children who came after Samuel. A daughter named Emma was born in 1885, with Clara's dark hair and sunny disposition. Then another son, Thomas, in 1887, who was quiet and thoughtful like his father. Richard visited twice a year, becoming a fixture in his grandchildren's lives. He eventually sold his shares in the San Francisco mining companies and moved to Warren, where he opened a small consulting business. It meant he could visit more often, and the children adored their grandfather. Jack and Henry became permanent employees, then friends. Jack eventually married a schoolteacher from Ruby City named Anne, and they built a small house on the edge of the ranch property. Henry married her sister, Helen, and they did the same. The ranch became a small community, families working together, supporting each other. Clara never regretted her choice. There were hard times, of course. Winters when the snow was too deep and the cold too bitter. Summers when the heat threatened the cattle and dried up the streams. Years when prices were low and money was tight. But through it all, she had Zach beside her, solid and dependable, her partner in every sense of the word. She watched her children grow, teaching them to read and write at the kitchen table, watching them learn to ride and rope and work alongside their father. She saw Samuel grow into a young man who was kind and strong, who wanted to take over the ranch when he was old enough. She saw Emma become a beautiful young woman with her mother's head for numbers and her father's stubbornness. She saw Thomas discover a love for drawing, spending hours sketching the landscape and animals around him. On their 10th anniversary, Zach surprised her with a gift. He took her outside to the spot where she had first stumbled into his barn, and there was a small monument, a stone marker with words carved into it. "Here is where the blizzard brought you to me," he read aloud, "where my life began. December 1882. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "Zach, it is beautiful. I wanted to mark the spot, to remember, because every good thing in my life started here with you." She threw her arms around him, holding him tight. Over his shoulder, she could see the ranch spread out before them, the house where her children slept, the barn where the horses whinnied. The fields where the cattle grazed, the mountains rising in the distance, beautiful and eternal, this was her home. This was her life, and she would not change a single thing. Years later, when Clara was an old woman with silver hair and grandchildren playing at her feet, she would tell them the story of how she met their grandfather. She would describe the blizzard that nearly killed her, the barn where she took shelter, the man who saved her life and captured her heart. "The blizzard left me on his land," she would always say, "but love made me stay there." And then Zach, just as old and silver-haired, would take her hand and squeeze it gently, and they would share a smile that spoke of decades of love and partnership and joy. They had 5 grandchildren by then, with more on the way. The ranch had been passed down to Samuel, who ran it with the same dedication his father had. Emma had married a lawyer from Boise and lived in the city, but she visited often with her family. Thomas had become a successful artist, his paintings of Idaho landscapes hanging in galleries across the West, but he always came home for Christmas. Richard had passed away in 1895, peacefully in his sleep, with Clara holding his hand. Margaret had followed a few years later. But their memories lived on in the stories told around the dinner table, in the lessons they had taught, in the love they had shared. Zach's health began to fail when he was in his 70s. His lungs had never fully recovered from the winters spent in unheated army tents during his soldier days. Clara nursed him tenderly, just as he had once cared for her when she was injured and frozen. She sat by his bed, reading to him from the books they had loved, reminding him of all the good years they had shared. "I am not afraid," he told her one evening, his breathing labored. "I have had a good life, better than I ever dreamed possible." "Do not talk like that," Clara said, though she knew the end was near. "You are not going anywhere." He smiled at her, that same smile that had made her fall in love with him all those decades ago. "We both know that is not true." "But it is all right, Clara. I am at peace. I am not ready to lose you. You will never lose me. I will always be with you in the land we built together, in the children we raised, in every sunrise over the mountains." He took her hand, his grip weak but still warm. "I love you. I have loved you from the moment I found you in my barn, covered in hay and stubborn as a mule." Clara laughed through her tears. "I love you too, always." He died that night with Clara beside him and his children holding his hands. It was peaceful as he had wanted. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a headstone that read, "Zachary Parker, 1854–1929. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he found love in a blizzard." Clara lived another 5 years after Zach's death. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the old days, passing on the wisdom she had gained over a lifetime. She taught her granddaughters to be strong and independent. She taught her grandsons to be gentle and kind. She taught them all that love was the most important thing, the thing that made life worth living. She died in her sleep on a cold December night in 1934, exactly 52 years after the blizzard that had changed her life. Her family found her in the morning, a peaceful smile on her face, her hand resting on the pillow beside her where Zach used to sleep. They buried her next to Zach on the hill, and on her headstone they carved the words she had always said. The blizzard left her on his land. Love made her stay there. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But they never forgot the beginning, the moment when a storm brought 2 lonely souls together and gave them everything they had ever needed. And on winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled through the mountains, people swore you could sometimes see 2 figures walking hand in hand across the fields, checking on the cattle, making sure everything was as it should be. The ghosts of Zachary and Clara Parker, forever bound to the land they had loved, forever together as they had always been meant to be. But they were not ghosts, not really. They were memory and love, woven into the very fabric of the place. They were in the strong walls of the barn where Clara had first taken shelter. They were in the stone marker that commemorated their meeting. They were in the laughter of their descendants, in the stories told around the fire, in the values passed from parent to child. The blizzard had brought them together, but it was love that had made them eternal. Love that had turned a moment of desperate survival into a lifetime of joy. Love that had transformed a lonely soldier and a lost young woman into partners, into parents, into the founders of a legacy that would endure for generations. And that, in the end, was the true miracle. Not that Clara had survived the storm, but that she had found in its aftermath something worth surviving for. Not that Zach had opened his barn to a stranger, but that he had opened his heart to love again. Together, they had built something that no storm could ever destroy, something that would outlast them both and carry on long after they were gone. Their great-great-grandchildren would walk the land someday, tending cattle that descended from the original herd, living in houses built on the foundation Zach had laid with his own hands. They would know the story, would tell it to their own children, would understand that everything they had, everything they were, had started with a blizzard and the love it had brought in its wake. The ranch was still called the Parker Ranch, and it always would be. It stood as a testament to what two people could build when they chose to face life together, when they refused to let hardship break them, when they held on to love even in the darkest and coldest of times. And every December, the family would gather at the stone marker, would tell the story again, would remember Zachary and Clara and the blizzard that had brought them together. The children would ask questions, the elders would answer. And the cycle would continue, generation after generation, keeping alive the memory of a love that had been strong enough to weather any storm. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardships they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the love that had sustained them through it all. The love that had turned strangers into soulmates, that had transformed a chance encounter in a snowstorm into a romance for the ages. The blizzard left her on his land. Love made her stay there, and together they had created something beautiful and enduring, a legacy of love that would never fade, never falter, never end.